Wilson Auto Repair, working on a Shelby, mostly upgrades. We've done some other work on this. Back in for a couple of things. We're doing a power steering kit. It's a Borgeson power steering kit where we remove all of the original power steering components and put a steering gearbox on to replace that, along with a power steering pump. And we are installing power brakes. This car didn't have power brakes, so we're putting a power brake booster in it, bending some of the brake lines, putting a proportioning valve on it, and then we are adjusting and bleeding the brakes. Last thing we're going to do, and actually we put a hydraulic clutch on this too, because the clutch that's on there is a little bit stiff for our customer. And then we're installing this look-alike Shelby steering wheel that we bought from CJ Pony Parts, and we're going to put it on. It's sticking out a little bit further right here, so we're going to put that on the middle and kind of machine this down a little bit, and then install it on there, and we'll be all finished with this car. Look for it again on our website, Wilson Auto Repair. Go to our YouTube site and do a like and a subscribe, or look at our blog. Thanks for watching. One of the issues that you have when you're working on a clutch or a transmission is trying to get it all back together properly so that it will fit and work. So as you can see in this video, the first thing we're doing is putting the bell housing up there, and you want to make sure when you made all these parts together that everything's clean, and you also want to make sure that you don't force any of the bolts to fit. It should fit pretty well, and all the bolts should start. Be sure you clean all your threads before you get started. Make sure all your bolts are clean before you get started. You may want to test fit some of the bolts to make sure that the threads match up. And then when you get the bell housing in, you stab the transmission. Now don't forget to put your clutch fork and throwout bearing in before you put the bell housing on. Most of the time that's the easiest way to do that. And in the back of the crankshaft there's a spot for what we call a pilot bushing or bearing. If you put a bearing in there, then you want to make sure that it's well lubricated with grease. If you put a bushing in there, then you want to make sure that if that bushing requires that it's soaked in oil, you want to soak it in oil overnight, because it needs to be permeated with oil. Now, the trick is getting it to all go in there. So one thing you want to also do before you put the pilot bushing or bearing into the crankshaft, you want to test fit it on the end of the transmission to make sure that it fits tight, but also fits loose enough that it'll spin, because the pilot bearing or bushing can cause as many problems as anything you get into as far as getting your transmission to shift smoothly. So yeah, as you can see right here, we've got the throwout bearing in, we've got the bell housing on, we've test fitted the nuts and the bolts, and everything fits. And the next thing we're going to do is what we call stab the transmission. So you want to make sure that the throwout bearing kind of lines up at the back of the transmission, and then lift your transmission up in there. Now hopefully you have a transmission jack to use to make this easier. If not, it's going to take 2 or 3 guys probably to securely put it up in there. Be sure your transmission's in gear so that the front shaft isn't turning freely, because it'll be easier to get it to stab. And you'll notice on the front of the transmission there's some splines, and they will line up with the splines in the clutch. So be sure that you test fit the clutch disc onto the front of the transmission before you put it all together to make sure it slides on properly. Make sure that it slides smoothly and there's no tightness about the way that it fits, and maybe just a little bit of grease in there would be helpful to make it last a little bit longer. So stab your transmission in, wiggle it from the back end, get some guys to help you. That's not an easy job to do, to get it all to go together. Once it fits in there, make sure it's all flush, and then bolt it up tight and you're good to go. I'm Barry Wilson with Wilson Auto Repair.